everyone, welcome to the Movie Section Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to talk about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, of course, before I go right down into my movie review, I do want to mention that, there is that whole situation going on between the actors and writers strike in Hollywood. And I want to say this, that I would not be here if it wasn't for the creative minds and the hard work coming from the actors and writers who have been very involved in making these movies, making these TV shows. If it wasn't for them, I would not be here right now doing this movie channel right here, doing the reviews, the critics, giving my movie reviews, giving my reactions. None of this would be happening if it wasn't for their hard work, the things that they do both on the big and small screen. So I do want to express that I am showing my solidarity for the actors and writers as they are trying to fight for what they believe is right in terms of getting fair compensations, the residuals, and the AI situation. I'm wholeheartedly supporting them, and hopefully there is going to be a point in the future where things will get resolved. So yeah, let's jump right back into my movie review for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, I just want to say this, right? It's just been quite, a very unusual summer, of course. We've had some hits, and then we have not some great hits, but let me just say this about Dead Reckoning Part 1. When I went to go see this film, I had quite a blast, right? I think one of the things that really surprised me going to this movie is how fast this movie was. Let me just express that this is a 2-hour and 42-minute movie, and then give or take probably 2 minutes and 35 minutes if you try to exclude the credits. But it's a long movie to start off with, and yet that being the case, this is a very fast-paced film. I never felt as if this was a movie that was super long. It was very well-paced. And I think a lot of it is just because of how fun it is, right? For me, when I was watching this movie, I was completely immersed in what was going on in terms of the latest Mission Impossible installment. Now, of course, when it comes to Mission Impossible, right? One of the reasons why we enjoy these movies is because of the death-defying stunts performed by Tom Cruise, right? Every time we watch something, or at least when we see a new entry of the Mission Impossible movies, we all know that there's going to be something that's going to literally blow our minds in some way or some form. And I think in this case, I definitely truly did enjoy the experience of watching, again, the death-defying action in this film. That's one of the reasons why I feel like I truly never felt how slow, or just, again, the pacing of this film. I felt like it was pretty timeless just watching it. I was very immersed into everything that was going on in terms of the story, the characters, the actions. Again, I feel like, it was just one that I never felt like I noticed the timing behind it. And even that being the case, right, I think even though this is the 7th Mission Impossible movie that we're seeing in theaters now, I will say for one thing, this is probably the one that I definitely felt a bit distinguishable compared to the other Mission Impossible movies that we had before. For one thing, this is definitely a movie that you can definitely get the sense of the old and the new in this movie. It was paying a lot of homage to the original Mission Impossible film, which, thankfully enough, I actually watched a couple of days before the movie, the new movie came out. So I was able to spot a couple of, things here and there from the original movie. So this was definitely one where I was just really surprised that they actually brought in a lot of, references from the original 1996 Mission Impossible movie, whether it be bringing back the character Kitteridge, or this one reference about Ethan Hunt that you would have to have watched the first movie to understand that reference. So yeah, this is definitely one I was just wow, they're really kind of bringing the old and the new. That was something that I really noticed right away, that this is something that they were trying to do in this film, which kind of makes sense considering what they're trying to do in terms of this film and being a 2-parter. In addition to that, I also want to mention that this is definitely a film that, unlike some of the other ones, this one felt far more personal in terms of, the character Ethan Hunt than ever before. Now, they don't go too deep into it. They kind of give us references and hints about his backstory, but there is something about his backstory that, we've never really known before. So it does seem as if we're going to be tackling that a little bit going into kind of the final movies. But this is definitely the one where I was just wow, they're actually integrating something from his personal life having an effect on his professional life right here, which is wow, this is definitely showing a far more high stakes mission for, Ethan Hunt, so played by Tom Cruise. But it is definitely showing a far more high stakes, high caliber situation that they're dealing with as a result of this, far more personal take that's completely affecting Ethan Hunt as a character. So I think as a result of that, it definitely helped knowing that, things were far more suspenseful, far more thrilling because of how the story was really developing, knowing that because of the high stakes that, even for Ethan, like he himself was feeling very scared. So getting that sense of this whole different atmosphere, that again, it kind of helped a little bit with the story feeling a bit different, very distinguishable, and also doing so in a way that again, it helps build upon like what the movie has been, like having a story that is built upon with all the action sequences and set pieces that are just phenomenal, right? So that was one thing that I definitely did enjoy with this film. And now, before I even go down into talking about the action pieces or the set pieces in general, I do want to say that even though this was a really fun Mission Impossible film, like again, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I've actually seen it twice now. I saw it on Monday and I saw it like on a Wednesday with my buddy Marilyn. But aside from that, right, like I mean, I will say this, right, it's not actually my favorite Mission Impossible installment, which might shock a lot of people, but yeah, I still enjoyed it, but it's not my favorite installment. I think that Fallout, and I think even for me personally, Ghost Protocol are still my favorite Mission Impossible entries. And that's just because I feel like, again, for this one, there are definitely some noticeable faults in terms of how they're executing some of the more detailed stuff in the movie. I think the first thing that really pops into mind is just how they really, handled the supporting cast. Like this is probably one of the cases where I can say that felt like a bit of a downer. Ever since Ghost Protocol, right? I think one of the heart and soul of this whole franchise has been the supporting cast, the people who have been supporting Ethan Hunt and trying to execute his mission, right? Like the impossible mission. Like I think even since I want to say Rogue Nation, we've seen how some of the supporting cast have been far more, integral into the actual mission, how they're actually being far more involved in, helping out Ethan in his pursuits, trying to execute the plan, trying to execute their spy mission or whatnot, right? The fact is that we got to see Benji and Luther and Elsa being far more involved in these missions, right? This was something that I felt was missing in this film. Like the heart and soul of it was kind of missing. And I think that was something that I noticed right away, that a lot of the screen time of the supporting cast was kind of dumbed down a little bit, which really disappointed me because I felt like they were definitely the best part, or at least some of the great parts about the Mission Impossible movie, seeing the supporting cast helping out Ethan in his pursuits and doing so in a way that they all have a really essential role and why we actually like them as a character. I think the one that I definitely want to actually highlight that has probably been, I would say, the biggest target in terms of how I believe was definitely dumbed down in the worst way possible is Elsa. I will say this, I think in terms of the Mission Impossible franchise, aside from Ethan Hunt, of course, I think my favorite, Mission Impossible character aside from Ethan Hunt, of course, is going to be Elsa. I think she's definitely been one of the most critical characters going into the Mission Impossible franchise. Ever since her introduction, she has definitely been someone who I absolutely just loved as a character. I mean, she is very similar to Ethan Hunt in so many ways. As more of an MI6 agent, of course, but she's definitely someone who's been far more ominous, someone who's very mysterious, someone, knows what's going on. And I think because of her expertise, that she's a very great counterpart to that of Ethan Hunt. And I think because of that, they have such a great dynamic when you see them on the big screen. And again, and I feel like in this one, because of what's going around, or how at least they tried to play around the story, that they really kind of took back Elsa character a little bit here. We don't really get to see a lot of her in this film. And even that being the case, I feel like there's definitely one scene in the film that I feel like that doesn't really do justice to how, of really just faithfully showcasing Elsa, who has been a very critical, very big, a very major character in a Mission Impossible franchise. I feel like that's something that really kind of disappointed me a little bit, knowing that they took this direction in this movie. Having said that about the supporting cast, the whole idea that a lot of supporting cast would kind of push back a little bit in terms of screen time doesn't apply for everyone in this movie. In this one, I feel like because of the fact that they had to push down a lot of other characters, they did have to actually enhance one character in particular, and that is Grace, who is played by Haley Atwell. She was actually she's actually a new character in this movie. If you see the trailer, she's actually featured a lot throughout the trailers and a lot of actually promos, really, but she's definitely a very integral character in this movie. Honestly speaking, whenever you do see Grace, you always see Ethan Hunt. They're pretty inseparable throughout this whole movie. So as a result, that probably explains why a lot of the supporting cast, aside from Grace, were kind of, had a much smaller screen time. But even that being the case, right? I don't know, for a lot of people online, I've been reading a lot of the online, reviews or people's opinions about the movie. And apparently a lot of people love the Grace character. I don't know. I'm probably the minority in this, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of Grace as a character. Because again, in this film, she is a thief, and just the way that she kind of presents herself on the big screen, like I just don't like her vibes a little bit. Just because I feel like she's someone who tries to present herself as a smart, like someone who is a smarty pants in a way that knows what's going on or is able to, do things that are definitely way out of her hands. And again, I understand why they introduced her as a character, because they kind of tried to show this parallelism between her and Ethan Hunt, especially knowing that, a part of the storyline, or at least a part of the arc that they're trying to introduce, is the fact that, Ethan had a past before IMF and how he got into IMF, that they're kind of trying to show this, this tie-in between her character and Ethan to show how they are far more alike than we would think, and trying to redeem her in some ways. Again, I just wasn't a big fan of her as a character. I was just not a big fan of her personality-wise. So that was just me. I mean, I will say for one thing, like, she does have some moments in the movie that I did enjoy, like her snarkiness whenever she is with Ethan, and it definitely helped enhance a lot of the humor here and there. That, okay, like, I definitely had some very laughable moments when I was watching the movie between the two guys, especially in one case with the car chase sequence. Just, again, their dynamic during those moments are probably the highlight of it all, just because, again, there's really great energy between her and Ethan, how they're trying to kind of, get away, trying to get through this whole cat and mouse chase in the middle of Rome, which I feel like that was like the one thing I feel like I understood why Grace, was introduced as a character here, and it worked out well in some of those cases. But and some of the other ones where we do see far more like the dialogue based, scenes, that I just wasn't a big fan of Grace as a character. Again, that could just be me, but I feel like, again, just knowing that Grace had a far more elevated screen time in comparison to some of the other, the recurring characters that we've seen before, far more, and had more time with them, that it was just kind of like a bit of a bummer seeing how they, they really handled all that. And I was just kind of like, being the case, right? I think overall, like, despite some of the, the flaws I can see here and there, and the fact that, there are some parts of the storytelling that I wish could have been a bit more, it could have been a bit more detailed, or it could have been a bit more sophisticated here and there. I think it doesn't take away the fact that this is a very fun film. Again, when I'm thinking about this movie, I'm talking about the stunt work, and the stunt work in this film is just mind-blowing, right? I think the one that really kind of like jumps into my mind, of course, is the whole, scene with the train sequence. Like, I won't go too much into details about it, because I do want to give everyone a chance to go see it, but the train sequence itself was just absolutely just thrilling to watch. Like getting to I think there's like a whole like 30-minute sequence right there just of the train sequence, and it's just mind-blowing to see how much stunt work went into that whole segment of the movie. Like, there's the humor, there's the suspense, the thrill. Like, I mean, you're literally like gripping your arms, just like, oh my god, like you're really kind of just like wondering, are they going to make it? Even though we already know that they're going to make it, but it's just like, you still get that sense of feeling, knowing that how dangerous some of the stunts feel. And it's just like, okay, that's something that I absolutely got out of the train sequence. So again, the set pieces in this film, it's just phenomenal as usual. Again, just the hard work that we see coming from Tom Cruise, and how he's willing to go, and I mean, again, just being moments away from basically killing himself. Again, like every time, as he always does with these Mission Impossible movies. Again, he does that once again in this film, where I feel like he once again puts in his 110% of his work when it comes to stunt work. Again, these films always feel so realistic and just mind-blowing to see. Again, just the stunt work that we see, the action that we get to see on the big screen, and just knowing what's going to happen. I mean, it's just phenomenal. And not even just that, right? I think, again, one of the things that I have to also compliment about this film, in terms of how they really executed the whole storyline, especially with the ending, is that even though this is supposed to be a two-parter film regarding about like this whole particular sequence about the key, like, it doesn't take away the fact that this movie does not end on a cliffhanger, or at least not a more traditional sense, because in this one, despite the fact that, it is a two-parter movie, this film actually felt like it ended on a very satisfying note. Like, everything kind of circled back, like, at least in terms of the main plot line. It all circled back. Like, I think that we definitely get a far more resolved situation in the end, knowing that, oh, wow, like, we actually had a beginning to the end where things kind of came through in a very, organic way, and it felt in a way that we kind of feel like we got a really rewarding ending. That was something that I was really surprised about. I felt like that was really refreshing and original, because I feel like, again, when we think about two-parter movies where we have like a part 1 and part 2, like there's going to be like, we expect like a cliffhanger, but this was definitely not a case where we get that, right? Again, I felt like it was a far more fulfilling, conclusion, but doing so in a way that we still know that there is going to be a part 2, and that they have already hinted where part 2 is going to, continue off. And now, even having said that, right, again, even though it is not the most traditional cliffhanger, there is, again, a lot of hints about where part 2 is going to go through. Again, I feel like, given how they hinted a little bit about Ethan Hunt's past in this first installment, or at least this first parter of Dead Reckoning, I would imagine that part 2 is going to dive deeper into his past before IMF. So that's something that I expect part 2 to, focus on a little bit, as well as the fact that they actually hinted about one part of the movie about, what this key could be the meaning to. Now, again, like the way that they actually added the opening sequence is a bit of a weird thing to add, because I feel like that kind of ruined a little bit of like, the rest of the movie, because it kind of spoiled it. But even that being the case, I didn't really mind it. Like, I mean, having actually also read why this had happened, because apparently it was like demand behind Paramount and I believe budget reasons, that they had edited this weird, awkwardly positioned opening sequence, and doing so in a way that basically spoiled the end of the movie. Like, I mean, I'm not too bugged about it. I feel like, again, like it still doesn't take away the fact that this is a very fun film filled with great adventure, great cat and mouse chase, the fact that we get some really great humor here and there, as well as some really unique storytelling, at least in this installment of the Mission Impossible film, that I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I think it's definitely going to be one of the best movies of this year so far. Again, it's not my favorite Mission Impossible movie, because I think that, again, there are some flaws to it that I feel like it could have been handled better, in particularly the supporting cast, which I feel like it was a bit of an injustice. But even that being the case, I thoroughly enjoyed Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Again, I've seen it twice now. So yeah, I think that's all to say about the film. I can't wait to see Part 2 and what they have in stores for that movie in terms of the storytelling as well as the stunt work. I mean, let's be honest, I cannot wait to see the stunt work. But yeah, that's all to say about it. Let me know your thoughts are about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. If you have seen it in theaters, let me know what your thoughts are about it. How do you compare this in terms of the other Mission Impossible installments? Does it rank high? Does it rank low? What are some of your favorite moments? Some of your favorite sequences? What are some things that you did like, didn't like? And again, what do you think, having seen kind of the ending of part 1 and where they kind of end things off, what would this imply for going into part 2? And that is if we actually get part 2 in time, considering that we are dealing with the actor and writer strike. So even that being the case, let me know what your thoughts are about Dead Reckoning Part 1. Let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to like and subscribe.